Good morning and welcome. My name is Leon Lenschik from Wake Forest. This is the Radiology Research Alliance Task Force presentations. We have 5 excellent presentations for you this morning. Each one will go for 15 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for all the audience feedback and questions. So the first one is the new models of mentorship and collaboration. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Bill Auffermann, and we'll be having so we basically formed a task force to discuss new methods for mentorship and collaboration, and several of the members of our team will be coming up here to present. And so basically, when thinking about research collaboration, I mean, traditionally you collaborated with the person who worked next to you. I mean, it was very easy to have meetings, easy to talk to people. And that gradually, from just working with your immediate neighbors, there are collaborations within and between institutions and similar geographic areas. And more widespread collaborations have become more common, but were at least historically more limited to information gleaned from journal articles and meeting people at meetings. And the degree to which large-scale collaborations over larger distances probably really didn't evolve until the last 20 to 30 years, with the advent of the internet and email allowing for more rapid communications over larger distances. However, the mechanisms for actually having dissemination of large amounts of information to large groups rapidly is still continuing to evolve right now, and we'll discuss some of those techniques and how they may be harnessed to allow for better research collaborations with large groups of people in different locations. So we'll be talking a little bit about the different groups involved in med students, radiology trainees, junior and more senior faculty, as well as some of the tools that may be used for fostering collaboration. So I'll focus a little bit on medical students. So when medical students are looking for a mentor, there's several things they're interested in. One is, what field they're in related to the medical students, proposed field of interest, what research they've done, if they have an interest in pursuing research, and of course the mentor's level of expertise in the field in question. They may also be interested in, also for the med students' particular pathway, are they more clinically versus research focused? A focus in academics versus private practice would tailor the mentor they select, as well as the mentor's research interests. For example, if they had a particularly strong interest in one area, they'd want to select a mentor probably in that area as well. Now, this brings about some challenges. So when selecting a mentor, many more senior mentors, senior physicians, will have a robust, level of knowledge regarding clinical practice and research, but then they probably also have a little bit less time on their hands than more junior mentors, and so certain balance needs to be sought in terms of finding people who have both the expertise and time available to be able to foster a successful mentoring relationship. And also, it's interesting to note that when considering mentoring and collaboration, that there are several, that one's mentoring needs will change, as a function of time. And so the mentoring needs of someone in medical school or applying to medical school will be very different from someone in applying to residency or looking to move forward from residency into their career. And that it's very natural that the mentors that they would select for each of these stages of their training and their careers will change. And that, it can be very difficult to do this on an individual, within a certain institution, and that, the internet and social networking functions via the internet may be a very viable option to allow one to be able to change mentors as they proceed through their careers, to have the mentors most best suited to them for their specific stage of their career. And so that begs the question, who are some of these mentors and mentoring groups? Well, they can include the medical, students themselves, such as interest groups, the academic medical school and radiology departments, having mentoring groups, as well as national organizations, such as the RSNA, AUR, as we've seen here, their mentoring workshops here at AUR, as well as other organizations as well. And just one very nice example of a mentoring organization that I thought was really interesting was the Society for Interventional Radiology. They actually have a site for mentors for medical students to get them interested in both radiology and interventional radiology. And you'll note here that you've got a bunch of markers showing the location of various mentors. And, so it's really, a med student from anywhere in the country could tap into this national network of potential mentors to mentor them through their career at various stages, without the same geographic limitations that one would have without this type of social networking capability. And so our next speaker will talk to us about mentoring radiology trainees. Thank
you. So even though we've talked about kind of mentoring networks and reaching out to people using the internet and social networks, one-on-one mentoring is still very important, especially for the people that are starting their radiology career, their radiology trainees. So people are looking for individualized relationships where, they get advice for the particular situations as opposed to kind of more general advice from lectures or meetings. Trainees, they tell us that they need career advice, help with their fellowship selections, their practice selections, and guidance on general professional development. They want to be under the care of a faculty member. They want research advice for specific projects and publications. And most trainees also really appreciate networking help just as a stepping stone towards reaching their goals, whether they're moving to a different location, getting the right position, getting the right fellowship. And one of the most important things is to be able to really bounce off their ideas and their problems and their concerns in a safe-sounding environment. These are a lot of things to accomplish, so one size doesn't really fit all. And just kind of surveying people, and we understood that basically all of these things cannot really be satisfied by one person, and that people are starting to reach to multiple mentors on one-on-one basis. And even not just within their radiology department, but from anybody else they interact within the medical center they're working at. Mentors, as I said, can be found everywhere. They can be a formal set of mentorship with a set schedule of meetings. Usually that is the role of the program director, education chair, or chair of a department. Usually there's a lot of departments that assign a mentor to junior residents, but then as residents progress from second to third year, usually they tend to find their own people, their own mentors. There is an AUR mentorship program, and which some residents take advantage of, but it's not huge so that everybody can take advantage of it. What are the qualities people look in the mentor? That someone that they can really have rapport with and shared experiences with. And again, it's this concept of junior versus senior faculty who have more experience, they know the trends in the field, versus junior faculty who have more time and they tend to be more empathetic towards trainees. And the qualities, I think that Bill touched upon this with the medical students. They have to be available. They have to be able to empathize and be supportive, provide honest feedback, even though sometimes that's hard, and be able to point people in the right direction. And again, the relationship may be ephemeral. The mentor may only be useful for a certain period of time, and both the mentee and the mentor need to kind of come to terms with that. We had a subgroup from a task force that looked at more senior trainees, which is like third, fourth year residents and fellows, and they felt that that was an important part of their training, that mentorship was a very, very key aspect of it, and that, in fact, there is not necessarily a lot of resources available to senior residents and fellows. So we have some ideas about how to improve on that. Some of these resources, the AUR Resident Academic Leadership Program, the RSNA, AUR-ARS Introduction to Academic Radiology, and the ACR-AUR Scholar Programs, are formal schemes that residents and fellows can get some formal mentorship, but I think that most people feel that we can do better. And then there is a concept of out of our trainees developing mentors, so we should also be thinking about that as training senior residents and fellows how to mentor more junior residents and medical students. And moving on to junior faculty.
Thanks, Myria. I'm Lucy Spaluto. I'm a junior faculty member at Vanderbilt, and I'm going to talk a little bit about mentorship for junior faculty. I think this is especially important for us to think about right now, especially with the theme of this year's AUR of diversity and inclusion. Mentorship has been shown to be really important for women and for underrepresented minorities to succeed in academics. So as we think of ways for this to happen, we need to think of ways to improve mentorship. So when a junior faculty member arrives for their sort of first day of work, a lot of things are going to happen. And one of those things needs to be developing mentorship. It needs to happen right at the beginning of their career. So who is responsible? Is it the chairman when they initially meet with this faculty member? Is it another department designee, such as your vice chair of education or your vice chair of faculty affairs? Is it that individual section chief? Should the onus lie on the junior faculty member themselves to find that mentor? And different institutions do all of these, and different institutions do all of these very well. I think that any of them are good options as long as one of them happens and you make it work for your institution. And the way you can make it work is, I think transparency is the most important thing. Everybody needs to know what to expect. You need to know what to expect of the mentor. You need to know what to expect from the mentee. You need to know what your timeline is. When are you guys going to meet? How often are you guys going to meet? How long are you going to meet for? What do you need to do between your meetings? And you need to know what resources are available to the faculty members. The mentor can help them with that. The department can help them with that. There's also the idea of maybe playing with a preceptorship rather than a mentorship, especially right at the beginning of a faculty member's career. And the goals of a preceptorship and a mentorship would be different. A preceptor would be more sort of during that first year of your career, someone who would help to orient you to the department and the institution, to help you figure out what your department's goals are and what your personal goals are, to help you transition into your new job and your new institution. Whereas a mentor, the final goal is a little bit different. Really, the goal of mentorship and that relationship is to increase an individual's potential for success. So the preceptor might be able to help you find the right mentor, and then the mentor might be able to really help your career take off. And like Myria talked about, the idea of a mentoring network or committee is really important in today's sort of more complex academic environment, especially when finances are a little tighter. Senior mentors don't have as much time to put in. So if you can get a little bit of a lot of people's time, you may be more likely to succeed. So you may have one mentor who helps you with your area of research, who focuses on the same type of research you do. You may have one who helps you with teaching and education, designing talks, helping to work with residents and fellows. You may have another one who can help you with administration and leadership. And you may have another one entirely different who can help you with ideas for work-life balance. Another person who has small children, another person who's been through similar family issues. In this past week's ACR bulletin, I just saw this and I thought it was really pertinent that they put out this small blurb on professional guidance. The most successful mentorship benefits both mentors and mentees. So the idea of mentorship is really important right now. The ACR recognizes it. They have put out through the Radiology Leadership Institute a couple mentorship programs, one to help you hone your mentorship skills and one to help you design mentorship programs. So there are a lot of opportunities available to improve mentorship at your institution. This is just a few examples of what different institutions have done. Some have junior faculty mentoring programs. Some have more senior faculty mentoring programs. Some are doing more workshops. So there's a lot of different ideas out there. Like I said, I don't think it matters particularly how you make it work at your institution as long as you figure out something that does work at your institution. National organizations are also starting to do a lot with mentoring. Like I showed you, the ACR is working on things. Through the AUR, the GRAF is a sort of awesome research mentoring network that you can apply for. The Abdominal Radiology Society has a mentoring program. RSNA has mentorship. There's a lot of online resources through the RSNA Career Center and the ARS Career Center. There are a lot of journal publications you can look to learn about mentorship and how to be a better mentor. And what can we do through the AUR and the RRA? We can work on improving the mentorship programs at the AUR. I know we talked about how they have one for residents. It would be really nice if we could sort of design and build a better one for junior faculty members and build a little bit more structured mentorship into the AUR sort of annual program and things that were available online for people to utilize. And we'd like to thank you. These are all of our task force members. Not all of us could be present today, but everybody really participated to help.
Thank you for that great presentation, and thank you for staying on time. Our next talk is on quality and safety, and Andy will get it going.
Thank you. So our task force spent the year exploring research issues in quality and safety. These were our task force members. So we really divided this into two areas to consider over the past year. First, I'll speak about the science of quality improvement. Then Mishal will speak about research needs in quality and safety. So in terms of the rationale for the science of QI, QI research is distinct from traditional scientific research. It seeks to achieve positive change in a specific process or service that tends to be highly dependent on the local environment. It entails ongoing adjustment of the intervention based on immediate feedback versus a summary analysis after a fixed intervention in traditional biomedical research. And it entails empiric changes in which the project may lack a deep understanding of the mechanisms of change. Despite these differences, QI research still warrants scientific rigor to ensure that that patients are not harmed in the name of doing QI. So this leads to the question, should we implement QI interventions without clear evidence that the benefits outweigh its costs and potential harms? And our view is that it should, that it may be costly, difficult, or impossible to generate the highest levels of evidence supporting QI work. There are challenges in blinding QI investigators. There can be an inability to establish causality, and the interventions are, again, highly dependent on the local context and culture. And even the best designed QI interventions could still fail or cause harm. In terms of the study designs for QI research, these are often qualitative in nature, for instance, involving interviews, focus groups, or just being direct observation, for instance, professional patient shoppers. The intent here is to discover everyday behavior and to see what actually happens in the given practice setting. QI research can also be done with quasi-experimental design, say a controlled or uncontrolled before and after study, or a time series design with multiple successive pre- and post-intervention measurements. So these will assume that any difference are due to the intervention. There's kind of a general assumption these approaches don't account for concurrent secular trends or external changes. These can't really prove causality. Nonetheless, these are often used for small local QI initiatives, and this can be useful if there are practical, ethical, or political barriers to, say, a randomized controlled trial. So, I mean, this would lead to consideration of when we may do a randomized trial in QI research. So these aren't common, but this is the way to establish causality. This would be useful before potential broad implementation of a QI intervention that has more than minimal patient impact or that's costly. These need to be conducted in a pragmatic fashion in QI, taking place in a real-world service setting, so it maintains its external validity. So, for instance, this can be done with a stepped wedge variant in which there's sequential rollout of the QI intervention to randomized clusters, and that sequential rollout may reduce the resistance to randomization. And this could work, say, when it's logistically impossible to roll it out to all clusters simultaneously. So in reality, for our local small-scale QI projects, we're just using traditional continuous quality improvement methods, say a PDSA cycle. It's important to remain data-driven and quantitative, iteratively measuring and monitoring the change. And generally, you'll see this presented with the chronological analysis of summary data, which is kind of a prototypical kind of figure you'll see in a lot of QI publications. So it's very common to see data presented as a statistical process control chart, just showing a measurement over time. Here we see an increased performance. This was measuring outpatient CT on time starts after an intervention, and this will show the variation in the process relative to control limits. Another common tool is a histogram. This will show the distribution of the measure. We could see what fraction were above a certain target or benchmark we wanted to reach. And also another common QI tool, the Pareto chart. Here we rank factors, say certain events, by decreasing frequency. and we might see, for instance, the most frequent defects or causes of errors in whatever we're evaluating. In terms of the ethics of QI research, it's not practical or effective for IRBs to oversee all QI activity. QI activities often entail incremental interventions with frequently adjusted goals in comparison with the fixed protocols that have clearly defined methods and periods of analysis that are registered with IRBs. Instead, QA activities may fall under the scope of just clinical practice and operations warranting standard professional supervision. So there are published works that describe the project characteristics that may categorize QI work as being human subjects research, and that's requiring IRB review. It's not purely determined by the intent to publish the results. It's possible that you have no intention to publish and it needs IRB review. And it's possible that you want to publish your QI work and it's not meeting criteria for research. It relates to the extent to which the intervention seeks to solely improve the local clinical context versus obtain generalizable knowledge. So I want to ensure you're encouraged to consult with the local IRB. And the last thing I'll touch on, QI manuscripts. So we view it as essential that QI work be published. This disseminates the discoveries, enables others to apply learned insights, and prevents others from wasting resources. And this also establishes QI work as an area of academic pursuit and scholarship. So there are reporting guidelines for QI manuscripts, the Standards for Quality Improvement in Reporting Excellence, or SQUIRE, so along the lines of PRISMA, STARD, and consort for other study types. So this isn't specific to any single study design, given the wide methodological heterogeneity of QI work. SQUIRE applies to anything from a local PDSA cycle to a large multi-center trial. Very recently was a simplified SQUIRE 2.0. This gives 18 items to be addressed by authors in a QI paper, highlighting 3 core areas: application of formal or informal underlying QI theory, the context of the intervention, and studying rather than just doing the intervention. And the SQUIRE framework is expected to enhance the quality and rigor of the QI literature, as well as the planning and conduct of the QI initiatives themselves.
All right. Hi, I'm Mishal, and I'm going to talk about the second part of our task force, which is the research needs in quality and safety. So just a brief intro, what is quality? I know we all know that, but just to touch a couple points: appropriateness of the examination in regards to its indications, making sure we've done the appropriate procedure in terms of protocol, accuracy and timeliness of interpretation, critical results communication. So those are a couple examples. Metrics, which departments use for measuring quality and safety. There are structural methods, metrics, process, and outcome metrics. Structural metrics are the metrics that allow a health system to provide the health care. So for in radiology, it would be having the appropriate imaging equipment. Process metrics is the health care that is provided. So again, all appropriateness of the exam, critical results communication, patient wait times, and then finally outcome metrics. What is the result to the patient? So are there complications after procedures, RAD path correlation for adequacy of biopsy samples? So those are a few of the metrics. How do we implement quality? Benchmarking is one way. So this is the process of establishing a standard of excellence kind of nationally and then comparing that with the current standards at one's institution. This is going to be used more frequently in order to reduce expenses and improve product and service quality. Benchmarking is not an individual process. It's a team process because as outcomes are found, and it helps change the entire practice in the organization as a whole. Here are some examples of national database registries that exist. They evaluate multiple different metrics, many of which I've already mentioned. What are some current research trends in quality and safety in departments? A couple examples are listed here. So standardized reporting and structured reporting, both of which help to streamline reports. There's standard language that's used in reports. You have consistent organization, so it helps for treatment purposes, and it's easy for data mining and research. A third research trend is department satisfaction and feedback surveys, which patients and referring clinicians can fill out. Helps to also improve workflow and quality in the different departments. We're going to switch now and talk about quality and safety metrics for individual radiologists. So a few metrics out there which are measured: critical results reporting, peer review, turnaround times, and then procedural competency for individual radiology, for interventional radiology evaluation. So critical results, a few pitfalls with critical results. First, you cannot measure whether the individual radiologist is appropriately reporting all critical results. We can measure whether the reported cases are truly critical and whether they're documented appropriately. However, with natural language processing tools, departments can identify the presence of critical findings in reports by going through the RIS systems and then whether or not documentation was performed for those cases. Future research needs in critical results reporting is methods for improving critical reporting and understanding its true impact on patient care. A second metric used for quality and safety for individual radiologists is peer review. So some pitfalls here, there's quite a few. Lack of feedback on reviewed cases, lack of group discussions in the department on quality improvement based on these missed findings, the lack of visible QI initiatives based on the peer review data analysis, lack of anonymity may bias the results, and finally, one of the big things is what is the value when there's a significant time lapse between the peer review and the initial report. So future research here then is basically on all of these above mentioned points in order to better validate the importance of peer review and to promote a positive safety culture. A third metric used to evaluate quality and safety in radiologists is turnaround times. Again, what is the true clinical impact of rapid turnaround times for rapid reporting? Does it affect the quality and or diagnostic accuracy of the reports? And finally, preliminary reads versus final reads. What is its true effect on patient care? Future research is on all of these above mentioned points, and we want to better validate that the validity of rapid turnaround times and the utility of it. And then finally, talking about procedural competency as a metric to evaluate quality and safety for individual radiologists. This is a big one because first, peer review is not required for interventional radiology. And then procedural competency is very challenging to measure. Current metrics are complication rates and patient outcomes after a procedure. However, these are subjective. So the interventionalist, him or herself, is reporting this data, so it's subjective and thus prone to biases. So this is a big area of research in terms of metrics for quality and safety, is finding out how do we assess procedural competency. And one of the ways is maybe future research on the validity of simulation-based assessment for procedural and technical competency. And then real quick, just to touch on competency and quality and safety concepts and practice. What do I mean by this? Basically, teaching quality and safety to our trainees and to our faculty. Why is it important? How to implement this into our daily practices. The ACGME is attempting to implement CLR, so the Clinical Learning Environmental Review, as a component of the next accreditation system. What is CLR? Basically, there are 6 areas which focus on patient safety, and the goal is to create physicians that can develop high quality and safe patient care and at the same time be prepared to participate in healthcare improvement throughout their careers. So some examples of quality and safety concepts in radiology which could relate to the CLR would be MRI safety, MRI and CT contrast safety, monthly M&Ms, and procedural competency. Many of these can be taught via formal curriculums which used simulation-based training as well as web-based modules. However, there are barriers to implementing quality and safety into practice. The first is learner buy-in and competing educational demands, basically convincing trainees that quality and safety is something important, something that they need to learn, especially when they haven't had a real-life patient safety experience. The second one is an inadequate number of eligible faculty with expertise and training in quality and safety, as well as the time burden to the available faculty when there's competing demands of clinical work, research work, administrative responsibilities. And then finally, limited departmental resources, basically the access to informational systems and financial support.
Thank you for that great presentation. As you can see, we have very broad topics, and the next one will be on image data sharing, presented by Reno Chatterjee. We'll do the question and answer after the last presentation.
Good morning. My name is Rano Chatterjee from Medical University of South Carolina, and I'll be talking about image sharing and radiology. And we live in an image sharing and just generally sharing sort of environment, right? My 4-year-old daughter can get on Facebook and find out what Mark Zuckerberg had for lunch yesterday. So that's, you know, we're in this environment, and in radiology, it's important for us to kind of adopt these tools, figure out where it's going, and have a good idea of how we can influence where these things are going. In thinking about image sharing in radiology, we tried to figure out how to take this broad topic and bring it down into an organizable structure. And so what we thought about was talking about the purpose and evidence of the benefits of image sharing, implementation, and current resources going into the barriers to implementation and then future directions. And then to bring this into the scope of AUR, we thought about bringing this as a clinical perspective on image sharing, research perspective on image sharing, and then an educational perspective, looking at how these tools are implemented in each of those categories. So going right into it, the clinical benefits of image sharing are clear. This reduces redundant and repeated imaging. It reduces costs to the healthcare system and reduces radiation exposure, to name a few. It improves the quality of our interpretations, improves in point-of-care decision-making at the institution, and it allows for patient access to their own medical imaging, which has been shown to improve patient care, kind of having a skin in the game. For cancer imaging, in terms of the benefits of research image sharing, cancer sharing, clinical trials, and radiogenomics, the NIH has placed emphasis on the sharing of research data to support secondary research. And so people fulfilling their grant obligations are obligated to publish clinical and imaging data as an encouraged practice now, but probably will be more so in the future. And in terms of clinical research practice, with multi-center clinical trials, this allows for central adjudication, which has also been shown to provide more consistent analysis of data. So looking into the implementation and current resources, the ACR has a technical standards document for the electronic practice of medical imaging. This addresses compression of images and into diagnostically acceptable image compression, DAIC. The FDA does not allow irreversible compression of mammographic images or transmission for interpretation. FDA does also require labeling of all displayed images to specify if irreversible compression was used. People involved in this image sharing within radiology, there's starting to emerge a group of people known as the imaging informatics professionals, and this requires certification through the American Board of Imaging Informatics, and it's a group that's basically going in and figuring out how to create a curriculum for this and what kind of standard knowledge base is required to be able to go out and put these things into practice. But in addition, technologists, radiologists, obviously referring clinicians and consulting physicians, as well as, importantly, the patients and patient surrogates are all members of this in this effort. The most important group that's come out of all of this is the Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise Group. This was founded in 1998, and if you think back to 1998, this was far before all of these efforts started, and it was formally incorporated in 2007. And so with the shift of information sharing technology, generally this group has kind of emerged as an important player in all of these. Their mission is to enable transparent interoperability between the many systems used throughout the healthcare enterprise. So this is not just image sharing, this is all of healthcare data sharing. And if you think about Epic and all the other big EMRs, they're all having a lot of these people contribute to their sharing efforts. The IHE Consortium has developed several platforms and what they call profiles for how to do these sharing mechanisms. And one is the Cross-Enterprise Document Sharing Profile. It's the XDS. And that XDS refers to all data, and then their XDSI refers specifically to imaging data. And this is a standard-based secure profile for sharing of images between online facilities, and it's supposed to be vendor agnostic. So it's trying to take out any of the vendor-specific requirements that occur. IHE Portable Data for Imaging Profile is another profile that I have established, and this requires DICOM images to be recorded in standard manner and permits JPEG web content. The American Medical Association expert panel on medical imaging, as well as many of the large societies, including the ACR, presented this as all medical imaging data should be complete sets of images of diagnostic quality in compliance with IHE PDI. So it's been largely accepted as the standard for sharing of images in clinical practice. DICOM is recommended. Full spatial resolution and pixel depth is achievable in DICOM. HIPAA compliance is also important. There's an emphasis on secure transfer of images. Internet transfer requires encrypted communications and site authentication. So if you think about the different scenarios you run into when thinking about clinical sharing of imaging information, one of those clinical scenarios is within the institution itself. And in that, it's a relatively simple transaction. You have a person-to-person consult. Someone comes over with a CD, comes to your workstation, and asks you to look over something. This can be achieved over person-to-person contact, multiple PACS and kiosks, or through an enterprise viewer from the EMR. The other situation is where you have sharing outside the institution itself. And this is what's being motivated by different paradigms. The Affordable Care Act has incentives and mandates for all medical information sharing. So this is something that's being incentivized by various groups. Sharing of outside institutions traditionally has been and mostly occurs now through CD and DVD sharing, but it's not a very efficient process, as we all know. VPNs are also local networks that are established between sites. This typically occurs within trauma networks, and these require attorney-drafted legal business associate agreements between all nodes in this sharing network. So if you think about it, when you have to have these individual legal requirements for each node, as you scale up, this becomes very onerous and cannot be implemented in a feasible way. The other method for sharing outside the institution is secure sharing over the internet. And this is really where the future of clinical image sharing lies. And this should be in accordance with the IHE cross-document sharing profiles, both the XDS and XDSI. The secure sharing over the internet, all entities are in the same affinity domain, which basically is a shared set of legal agreements for the infrastructure in which all of this occurs. Some of the legal implications and considerations in image sharing in clinical practice include ownership rights. Who owns these images when they're acquired? When you send them off to another institution, do they own them as well? And the precedent is set that the ownership right is established by the institution that creates the images, the ones that acquire the images. And they're the ones that are responsible for maintaining the archive of those images. An individual patient and the referring site that receives images has a right to inspect their records, obtain copies, and request records be amended, but they can't go through and request that records be deleted or changed in a fundamental way. And this really doesn't affect most people, but there are certain situations. There was an NFL player who had an imaging injury at one institution, went to another place, had a contract coming up, and wanted the study removed. And this is where these kind of precedents become important. Neither the patient nor the institution can have the medical record changed or removed, and ACR guidelines do not require the receiving institution to maintain a copy of that data. If you think about the current platforms for image sharing in clinical practice, the RSNA Image Sharing Network, ISN, is a 2009 partnership between RSNA and the vendor community. It was funded by the NIH, and their goal was to create a patient-controlled, and that's the important part of this, is that it's a patient-controlled exchange mechanism built on existing IHE profiles between healthcare enterprises. We'll see why patient control has implications and how this is carried out. And enterprises include everything from individual practitioners to large healthcare systems. RSNA Image Sharing Network uses the IHE XDSI standard for data exchange, and they developed a cloud repository, which is the RSNA Clearinghouse. You may have heard about it if you went to RSNA this year. They had a big booth and a lot of information on that. And basically, the RSNA Clearinghouse receives submissions and supplies them to principal institutions when those studies are requested. So it's kind of a central database where things are sent and then through mechanisms sent to the places when they're requested. The central resource is supported by the ISN, so individual institutions don't have to have their own firewalls outside of their, or don't have to have their own servers outside of their own firewalls. The image sharing network allows for secure patient control transfer of imaging data. DICOM data is transferred through the clearinghouse in an encrypted fashion, and a password called a hash is generated using patient's date of birth, patient selected password, as well as a token email address. And so this is something really the patients have complete control over. The clearinghouse is subcontracted to the vendor Life Image, And there's a business associate agreement that are not shared between the ISN enterprises individually, but through the clearinghouse. So anytime another institution wants to gain access to this, they have to have one agreement with the clearinghouse, and that's all. It's not with all the other institutions independently. And this allows for separate enterprises to exchange data, even if they've never have before. Transfer is controlled by the patient who is not constrained by HIPAA limitations. And that's the important point is if it's patient controlled, then the HIPAA constraints that are there don't necessarily apply. So it's essentially like having a virtual CD that you're transferring, then the patient is transferring from one person to another. So thinking about the research technical considerations, we're kind of switching gears here from clinical to research. And one of the important things to consider in research implementation of image sharing is anonymization and de-identification. Scientifically valuable metadata must be preserved. So HIPAA privacy regulations provide two methods for de-identification. One is called the safe harbor method, and that has 18 categories of PHI that must be removed. Two of those categories include sex and age. Obviously, those are important for carrying out any scientific endeavor with these images. So there's a second method called the statistical method. And this allows for some of the PHI to be preserved as long as you can show that this is insufficient information to identify a trial subject. So as long as you have a large enough number and take out enough information, can show that an individual can't be identified. That's another statistical method for preserving privacy. Their tag and raster de-identification tools. RSNI clinical trials processor is emerged as the mainstay tool for de-identification. This is highly reliable, has 35 stages called pipelines in 4 categories, and there's an audit logging mechanism that's compliant with FDA regulations. And there's a database of vendor-specific tabs within the DICOM system. They also have a database of where PHI or protected health information is burned into the images. So certain vendors and imaging tools burn in information into the images, but the CTP tool is able to, based on the specific vendor and the imaging platform, remove those individual pixels. So it's a pretty robust tool. There are additional tools available, including the DICOM Cleaner, ImageJ, Clear Canvas, as well as Osirix. The implementation platforms, RSNA clinical trials process with RSNA image sharing network is also used in research as well as clinical practice. National Cancer Institute Quantitative Imaging Network has developed the Cancer Imaging Archive, which is an open source vendor neutral platform specifically for the cancer study space. And this supports the submission, curation, and public distribution of cancer images. And RSNA uses CTP for de-identification. And the TCIA, the Cancer Initiative, to date, since 2014, as of 2014, has about 26 million radiologic images and supports 40 active cancer research groups. So it's a robust tool. The ACR also has a transfer of images and data triad platform, which has been used mostly for clinical trials at this point. In terms of educational technical considerations and implementations, the unique things about sharing in for educational purposes, and much of what we do in AUR, is to be able to create questions and have a mechanism for tracking responses for testing. And this is also, you want to be able to view these studies on a web browser or a portable device. You want to be able to share links over the internet to be able to provide other clinicians or colleagues from not at your institution to be able to look at these images as well. Tag studies into categories and groups, and also have robust de-identification processes. The ACR Radiology Content Management System incorporates cloud-based PAC system, and third-party vendors are coming out with these products as well, including McKesson's Horizon StudyShare and others. In terms of future directions for where image sharing needs to go, increased use of decentralized platforms for uploading DICOM studies using the XDSI profile is kind of the standard at this point that most people are using. Implementation and training of new technology for both radiologists and referring clinicians is very important. Without having referring clinicians buy into this process, it quickly loses steam and is not a viable effort. And additional efforts such as AUR's efforts to consolidate, organize, and disseminate image sharing advances and resources are kind of important for the future of this. If you're like me, about 12 minutes ago, you got lost in the sea of acronyms, and there's a lot of information here, and we've only presented kind of the salient points of what we're preparing for the manuscript and having together. The manuscript is geared towards this kind of an audience. So if you kind of feel like you may have gotten a little bit of this but aren't sure exactly what all the acronyms meant, it'll be much more of a presentable format and a much more usable format in terms of the tools and having things organized. So we look forward to presenting that and having that out there. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. The next presentation will be on Virtual Journal Club. Alison Chetlen from Penn State.
Hi, everybody. We're going to be talking today about the Virtual Journal Club. We gave it a fun title, Another Time, Another Space. Our speakers today are myself, Hansel, Otero, Carol, Dell, Stephane, Desouches, Matthew Heller, happy birthday, and Agnieszka Solberg. The learning objectives. At the conclusion of this activity, participants will be able to discuss the current application of virtual journal clubs in medical and graduate medical education and continued lifelong learning, and explain the advantages and disadvantages of virtual journal clubs over traditional venues.
Journal clubs originated in Germany and England in the late 19th century. In North America, the founding father of journal clubs was Sir William Osler, at McGill University in Montreal in 1875. Journal clubs soon followed into the United States, starting at Johns Hopkins University in 1889. Wow, this is a very sensitive keyboard, excuse me. The weekly institutional meetings thrived for many years before evolving into less frequent, more focused departmental meetings. And the intent was to minimize the cost of journal subscriptions by disseminating purchased materials to colleagues. In 1960s, the focus of journal clubs shifted, becoming a forum for keeping up to date with the expanding corpus of medical literature. As medical education evolved from an apprenticeship into a focused, supervised training and mentoring experience, so have journal clubs evolved into an opportunity to teach and learn evidence-based medicine and critical appraisal of literature. Journal clubs also allow for that moved on its own. Journal clubs also allow for an alternative learning environment distinct from the didactic form of education utilized in most medical schools to allow the learners to assimilate the information being presented, interact with their peers, and have the ability to discuss and challenge conclusions of the article being presented. Journal clubs have been implemented throughout all parts of medical and nursing education. Each group tends to have a slightly different path for successful implementation of a journal club, sharing some commonalities, including the following: a trained leader to choose the articles and lead the discussion, a convenient and regular anticipated meeting times, formal structure, short and long-term goals, which are clear, materials which are disseminated before the meeting, and of course, no one should actually be expected to read the journal article ahead of time.
I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the current applications of virtual journal clubs and e-learning for medical education. This ranges from medical school curricula and residency and fellowship education to international and interprofessional clubs. Within medical school, journal clubs are used to teach how to conduct a literature review and critically appraise an article. The virtual journal club also facilitates what's called flipping the classroom, which is a reversal of the traditional classwork homework paradigm. Articles with video discussions can be sent out prior to class, allowing the class time to be dedicated to activities and more in-depth discussion. There have been 2 published experiences with traditional radiology residency journal clubs through the University of Michigan and Pennsylvania. While these were approached in different manners, both were very successful with participants finding the activities useful. The virtual journal clubs allow for improved resident involvement despite separate sites and clinical responsibilities. One of the current applications in residency and fellowship is the ACR's Resident and Fellow Virtual Journal Club, which allows direct interaction between trainees and leaders in the field. For practicing physicians, multiple professional societies have utilized virtual education, including virtual journal clubs, as e-learning resources, often offering CME credit for participation. Some radiology-specific applications are RadIQ, put out by Massachusetts General Hospital, and the Radiology Curriculum Management System by ACR. Both these platforms lend themselves well to incorporation of virtual journal clubs. From an interprofessional standpoint, interprofessional education has been shown to improve patient outcomes, reduce negative stereotypes, and increase positive working relationships. Virtual journal clubs offer a practical avenue for these interdisciplinary discussions. Internationally, one example is the Global Emergency Medicine Journal Club, which facilitates discussion with 3 expert facilitators over a period of 1 week. The extensive virtual venue allows for more rapid horizontal dissemination of information and best practices as compared to the traditional vertical dissemination that can take a long time.
So now we're going to talk about actually how to set it up. How do you set up a virtual journal club? So the online journal clubs, they're standardized. They're easily accessible for evidence-based discussion. It can allow for both synchronous, same time, or asynchronous discussion, allowing members to contribute at a time that's convenient for them and to participate at a time which is convenient for them. That's really useful for physicians with varied schedules. This may seem like a daunting task, but we've broken it down into a task and an actionable item. So your first task would be to establish a home repository. You could create a website or an affiliate with an existing website. As far as incorporating platforms, we encourage the use of several social media avenues. You need to know and prepare your audience. You'd have to target your virtual journal club depending on the type of audience you have and how wide. Is it local? Is it national? Is it international? You want to manage the expectations of the participants and provide digestible multimedia. And it's always important to have a follow-up discussion and post the summary notes and the discussion notes following your virtual journal club session. So as far as designating key team members, the director should really be someone who's committed and experienced and skilled in critical literature review. This could be a faculty member, it could be an expert in the field, it could be a resident, or it could be a combination of many of those types of professionals. It's helpful to have a social media expert as part of your key team. And it's also helpful to have an embedded librarian. They can help you find resources that you may not otherwise think about. They can also help with archiving. To establish a home repository, it's important to have a web platform. This can be used to store the information, coordinate the participants, announce upcoming events, and to house the discussion notes. It could be an independent standalone website, or it could be affiliated with an existing website. The home repository is going to welcome new members, state the aims of the virtual journal club. It could provide tutorials about how to critically appraise the literature. It could provide and house the archives of past discussions, and it should set the rules for posting comments. We encourage the use of several social media platforms such as Facebook, Google, Twitter, podcasts. This will appeal to more demographic groups, gather the maximum audience, and increase the visibility of your virtual journal club beyond the group of individuals who may preferentially use one of these platforms. If you're targeting the virtual journal club to a residency program, it's always helpful to allow the residents to select the articles. This has been shown to have a strong influence on the success of your virtual journal club. The residents may choose special interest articles or an article that's really timely or controversial. You'd like to know and prepare your participants, and you need to address their needs and customize the goals for your participants. You could collaborate with other residency programs, have an interdisciplinary participation. You could offer continuing education credits, or you could also work with your hospital and target some of the quality and safety goals. Your virtual journal club could be local, it could be regional, national, or even international. The director should really determine the most appropriate meeting type for your target audience. It could be synchronous or asynchronous or a hybrid of both. The objective of the virtual journal club.
Yeah, in terms of what are the expectations of a virtual journal club, it's important to keep in mind that the objective hasn't changed at all. The main objective is to stay up to date with the latest literature. We just have changed the mechanism of delivery. We do believe that the usage of a third-party application, and I give the example here of a Google Hangout, it allows for familiarity with the products. It allows the audience to know what to expect in the interface, and it kind of outsources from the group the need for technical support and for tutorials on how to use the tool itself. There is also an expectation of direct interaction with the author, and this can, again, be live during the live session, or it can be asynchronous. You do need to plan and allow for active engagement of the audience. The expectation is more and more that you are entertained anytime that you are in in a formal activity. So just to keep in mind that there are some certain types of information that are more easy to share and that keep your attention longer, and those include photos, videos, and graph in general. In terms of the follow-up activities after a live session, there is two sets of objectives. One is allow for the participants to stay connected in between sessions. So the expectation is that there is prompt postings of the articles on the repository, that there is a summary of all the main discussions, and these summaries can be archived just for members in the website, or you could consider sending a letter to the editor or turning the discussion into a letter to the editor if major issues have been identified with the article. There is also an option of just posting comments straight to PubMed. So anytime the article it's pull out, it has your comments there. Collaboration with the journal that published the original article is important. And again, keep constant presence in social media, including reminders and updates. On the other hand, there are certain activities that are for internal consumption and is to monitor engagement and measure success. And for this, you really want to have periodic feedback from the participants that will help guide the choices of topics that are going to be selected, and again, guide you in format changes or practices changes that might be needed. In terms of monitoring the participation, there are numerous ways, number of comments, number of tweets or retweets, and there are certain tools for that. Just remember that none of this is perfect. Viewership numbers are, in particularly, might be skewed down if, for example, you have a whole residency program joining in as a single user. And that tends to happen more often if you try to do international activities. In terms of timing,
I'll just quickly talk about one of the first dichotomies that you'll face with setting up a virtual journal club is whether you'll do a synchronous or asynchronous format. The synchronous means everyone is logged on at the same time, and the problem with this is scheduling. People have different schedules, different time zones, so you'll exclude, no doubt, some people in the group. The positive part of this is that it's going to be a high-energy, very interactive session with a lot of collaboration at once. Compare this to the asynchronous, where the group responds to the articles at different times. So the article is posted, and members can read it at their own leisure and post comments. The issue with this may be a loss of momentum or less interaction, but on the other hand, there's usually more in-depth discussion and more flexibility for scheduling. So overall, perhaps a hybrid is best, where the article is posted, giving members time to read the article, comment, and then wrap up with a lively discussion. In doing this, it's useful to have multiple platforms available. This encourages widespread dissemination, instant discussion, and increased engagement through sub-discussions that can occur during the actual journal club meeting.
So what are the opportunities that we have in emerging applications of the virtual journal club as opposed to the traditional one? First of all, networking is widely expanded by a virtual journal club. We can actually include the authors of articles in our discussion. We can include distant experts in radiology. We can include non-radiology experts and physicians. Our scope, rather than local, can be regional, national, or international. With these contacts, we can build relationships and develop trust. We hear different perspectives from different areas, and then we have opportunities for future collaboration and publication and research. Opportunities in leadership are provided by the virtual journal club. Who better than a radiologist to lead a multidisciplinary journal club? Evidence-based medicine relating to quality and safety and imaging 3.0 can be examined with a virtual journal club that's multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary, and these both would offer value to our institutions. Virtual journal clubs are convenient forums for continuing education in SAM, and it has been shown that if credit is offered, this attracts participants and it decreases the attrition rate. And then finally, global outreach is an important benefit. It has been shown that when U.S. experts collaborate with local leaders, and this could be done via a virtual journal club, that there's improvement in real-time procedural skills education, residency training, and rapid sharing and integration of new technologies. So in conclusion, virtual journal clubs provide opportunity for immediate horizontal transmission of research, faster translation to clinical practice, and foster collaboration, discussion, and analysis of information from many users. Thank you.
Thank you for those great presentations, and congratulations for getting so many people involved. Last but certainly not least is a presentation on precision medicine, which was a task force chaired by Dhakshina from MD Anderson.
So our task force, as was just said, is on the role of radiology in precision medicine. This is a huge topic, and 4 of us are going to speak and give you really a whirlwind tour of this. Precision medicine, this is the definition according to the National Academy of Science, which I'm not going to read to you, but paraphrase with the slogan that we've all heard, the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. The Precision Medicine Initiative was launched by President Obama in his 2015 State of the Union address, and he's earmarked $215 million to invest in this initiative, with multiple agencies tasked with recruiting volunteers, including the NIH, the NCI, and the FDA. So they're going to recruit millions of volunteers who will donate their patient information, data, outcomes, and test results to develop huge databases for people to share. So the role of radiologists in the area of precision oncology is vast, and some of these areas include screening, early diagnosis, image-guided biopsy, response assessment, and recognizing treatment-related complications. I'm going to use oncology as a prototype for the enormous potential of precision medicine. Some of the things that radiologists have already done include screening for lung cancer. We've shown that low-dose CT can significantly reduce morbidity associated with lung cancer, and the LungRADS reporting system is a nice standardized method for reporting findings. Now, lung cancer genomics has enormous potential also. We normally would subdivide lung cancer into 2 broad categories, but now with molecular testing, which is routine in lung cancer, we're able to find actionable mutations, and specifically 2 that now are always tested for, EGFR and ALK mutations, because we have drugs which are shown to have dramatic responses in these cases. And you can see from the year and the events that I've outlined, a significant increase in drugs that are being approved rapidly to help treat this disease. Again, to show you some of the rapid pace, in 2011, there were 30 unknown mechanisms, and now we've decreased that in the year 2013 to only 18%. So to give you a visual description, this is a 50-year-old woman with a right hilar mass and adenopathy, non-smoker. A biopsy was performed confirming an EGFR mutant lung cancer. She was treated with erlotinib. You see significant treatment response. She's continued on therapy. Again, continued treatment response. About a year and a half, the tumor starts to regrow. She, however, has continued on therapy. Again, now we have disease progression. Radiology significantly helps here with rebiopsy, confirming an acquired resistance in a T790M mutation. She was started on a clinical trial because the drug that was used for this had not been approved, but since this talk has started, or the paper started, this drug has received FDA approval. So she was started on a therapy with AZD9291. We see disease response. Again, she's continued on the therapy. There's more treatment response. About a year and a half later, which is when resistance typically develops, we see some tumor regrowth. And again, she still continued on the therapy, but now we see some progression, and she's going to be considered for stereotactic radiotherapy. Before the era of precision medicine, we wouldn't have even had this conversation because the patient would have succumbed to the disease, and probably death would have ensued. This was August 2011, and here we are. This is January 2016. None of these things, however, come without a cost, and radiologists will also need to be aware of the toxicity profile and the side effects associated with the drugs. And I just wanted to show you some of the common ones: colitis with a fluid-filled ascending colon. Pneumonitis is one that we all need to be aware of. You see ground glass opacities with withdrawal of the drug, significant improvement in the pneumonitis, but rapid regrowth of tumor nodules. And then hepatitis is another one that we should all be aware of.
So when we discuss the role of breast imaging in the era of precision medicine, we move to breast cancer from lung cancer. I believe breast imaging has really some unique opportunities. First, breast cancer clinical subphenotypes have already been defined and really, fortunately, can really help to guide the radiology research that we perform in this area. We also already have standardized nomenclature with BI-RADS. We have more than 20 years experience with this language, this standardized language that really puts breast imaging in a position to lead the way. Also, breast imaging, in terms of the potential contributions we have, we can look at predicting prognosis, assessing response to therapy, and surveillance of high-risk genetically predisposed patients. And because there's such a high prevalence of this disease, there's really an opportunity to have a large impact. So we talked about the subphenotypes already being established. In subphenotypes, the grading, staging, and classification systems define those subpopulations that are segmented by prognostic categories and also categories that may benefit from different treatments. And really, fortunately, through the work of our oncology colleagues, these are very well defined for breast cancer. Also, I mentioned the importance of standardized nomenclature and that standardized reporting that they say is so important in this field of precision medicine. And again, with BI-RADS, and now us being in the 5th edition of BI-RADS, this is something that's very comfortable for breast imagers. When we look at the 3 areas where I see the greatest potential for impact, we talk about predicting prognosis. And given that we know that each of these subcategories that are subphenotypes have already established prognosis, if we can look at the imaging and find those imaging features that are associated with each of the subtypes, we have the opportunity to perhaps, just through the imaging, predict prognosis. And this is just an example here that talks about those very aggressive triple-negative cancers being associated with rim-enhancing masses with smooth margins. Also, changes in tumor imaging characteristic following neoadjuvant therapy can be utilized for prognostic information. So really, perhaps we can use the tumor vascularity through kinetics, something we could call the hemodynamic imaging biomarker, or the ADC values that we get as potential predictors of overall survival. Second, assessing response to therapy, similar to the lung cancer example, using that data we have from the imaging where we see response to therapy and being able really to make prognostic decisions out of that. And changes in tumor metabolic activity on PET being shown to be an early indicator of treatment effectiveness for breast cancer. So really helping to guide our clinical colleagues in terms of what treatments are effective and not effective. Last, surveillance of high-risk genetically predisposed patients. We know that about 5 to 10% of breast cancers are linked to inherited gene mutations. The most common ones that we think of would be the BRCA1 or the BRCA2 genes. And because of this, because we know these patients have a really increased lifetime risk of developing breast cancer, we are already in the practice of using annual screening breast MRI to screen these patients. Similarly, we can use this same process of screening with breast MRI for the other patients that are at high risk due to genetic predisposition. And this is just an example here on the mammogram that was performed about 3 months before the breast MRI. Really, we see this cancer in this BRCA1 patient that is not very well visualized here on the mammogram, and that increased sensitivity of the breast MRI in helping to screen these patients.
Okay. I'm Ganeshan from MD Anderson, so I'll try to very briefly talk on the role of PI. I'm acutely aware of the time constraints. We have all the tools now. So, we asked for fancy MRI techniques, fancy CT techniques, novel molecular imaging agents. We have them all. It's just time to start using them. I'll probably select a very few cancers and probably have to cut short at some point of time to let Emmy speak as well. So to begin with prostate cancer, I think that there's two major roles that multiparametric MRI can play. One, to find those so-called hidden tumors, which are not really hidden, as I'll show you in a second. And more importantly, it makes a huge impact in differentiating the clinically significant from those which are, clinically insignificant. And that's probably the, the main thing, because we really want to avoid overdiagnosis. So here's an example. 59-year-old had slightly increasing PSA levels, had a prostate biopsy, and that showed a Gleason 3+3 6. Thankfully, the patient wanted to have an MRI, and so we do see a small focus of tumor there. I'm assuming that's what the blind biopsy picked up. But look there, it's a huge 2.5 centimeter tumor in the anterior transitional zone, and if you look at the ADC, that's much more restricted diffusion there. We said go back, rebiopsy, and sure enough, that turned out to be a Gleason 8. So a complete change in management from what would have potentially gone to an active surveillance into a prostatectomy. Okay. Moving on to RCC, we know it's a very heterogeneous tumor. There's multiple genetic pathways out there, and each of them behave very differently. Okay. And radiogenomics has now gone big way to help us in decoding the mystery. So we have a clear idea now that if you have a clear cell RCC, which has a VHL gene pathway, that has very distinct imaging phenotypes compared to, say, those with a BAP1 mutation or a MUC4 mutation. Right. And we also have now these advanced fancy MRI tools, which are still evolving, but promising all the same. So here's an example of a patient that I had. You can see a fairly big tumor in the left kidney. The ADC map shows low ADC values. Dynamic contrast MRI shows hypoperfusion, but the bold MRI shows very high R2 star values. This turned out to be a Auffermann grade 4 tumor. Okay. Moving on to lymphoma, I think this is probably one of the most elegant examples of precision imaging in its purest sense. Here's a 28-year-old with a very FDG avid anterior mediastinal lymphoma. That's a pre-treatment PET-CT. That's the first interval post-treatment PET-CT, and you can see that the response is great. It's less than the mediastinal pull uptake, dual 2, great response, and a good prognosis. On the other hand, a very similar aged patient, and if anything, you see a much smaller side of tumor, although extranodal. So this is the pre-treatment PET-CT, first post-treatment. You still see that the area of uptake, it hasn't blown here, but you still see the area of uptake has, quite high FDG uptake, dual 5. We know it's a, poor response, poor prognosis, but not even the world's worst pessimist would have predicted this. 9 months down the line, it just flew all over the place. Okay. Due to lack of time, I'm just going to let Amy speak. All right.
Hello, I'm going to pay lip service to the non-oncologic applications in precision medicine. More will be available on all of these in our written paper. The CT so starting off at the top, the CT that's done of the head and stroke can be used to route patients to TPA versus mechanical embolectomy. Several major trials have been done to look at how well this works. MRI, likewise, is used to look at progression and predict outcomes in Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis. In cardiovascular, we've been using the nuclear medicine stress test for a long time. Newer tests such as the CT calcium score can also be used, and this is basically a gateway for diagnostic and CT angiography. Molecular imaging agents are also on the horizon, similar in pulmonary medicine. In liver imaging, we use MRI and ultrasound to look at cirrhosis, particularly elastography techniques. However, special MRI techniques such as iron imaging and fat fraction can also be used to figure out why the patient has cirrhosis so that can be treated earlier. Additionally, just to touch on Crohn's disease, where a classification system based on MRI and genomic data can be used to predict whether a patient is going to respond to the expensive TNF-alpha inhibitors that are on the market. In the kidney, techniques such as MRI and ultrasound are used to look for early chronic renal disease. On the horizon, there are techniques such as 3D printing and molecular imaging. I'm going to let you read the paper for that because I think we're almost out of time, and I'm going to let Dr. Ganeshan speak one more time. Thank you.
Honestly, I was not going to speak twice. I had another resident speaking, but she just couldn't make it today. So to conclude, we're just going to briefly look at the future of precision imaging and the challenges ahead. The future is exciting. No two patients are the same, and that speaks for itself. So it just means we have to individualize treatment for everyone. The anatomical and functional imaging is here to stay, and it's going to take us forward. We've already seen with inelegant examples of how imaging can very well act as biomarkers in every step of management, be it in risk stratification, be it in even predicting response to therapy, to evaluate the response to therapy, and to predict the overall prognosis. We have now several molecular imaging probes, which helps us to identify events occurring at the cellular and subcellular level, and even identify individual tumor mutations. And like Emilia has shown, precision imaging in the non-oncological fields is also pretty promising. But then there are serious challenges which lie ahead, which affects everyone: the patients, the clinicians, the radiologists, and the manufacturers. For the radiologists, there are multiple sources of frustration, right? So it's not an easy path. Well, to begin with, most of these, if you're going to go into PI, most of it's going to be quantitative and semi-quantitative, so it's going to be quite a steep learning curve. We have a much longer time, potentially, for performing these studies and for interpreting. And we also have to remember the time commitment for educating the technology, because that's key. You definitely want to make sure we have standardized techniques available there. And at the same time, we have the management behind our back, emphasizing on the RVUs all the time. So really, are we going to have radiologists going to focus too much on these things? Begs the questions, right? Moving on to the clinicians, well, they actually have the unenviable task now, because previously we were saying we don't have much of genomic data, and now we know you just have an explosion of genomic data. And the question now becomes, what do I do with this? Which are these are really pathological and which of these are not? And we are still learning. This, to me, is a landmark study. Recently, there was a paper which looked at 815 patients, 15 different tumor types, and what they found was staggering. 63% of these genomic alterations were actually not pathological. They were found to be normal inherited gene alterations. And what it means is, just look at this. What it means is, if the study had, the treatment was based on these genomic alterations alone, almost 50% of the patients would have received treatment which was inappropriate. I mean, that's serious business there, right? So we really have to decode this much better before we implement it full time. In terms of patients, again, the fear of unknown. They have no idea as to what data is going to be collected. They have no idea how this is going to be collected, and they have no idea how it's going to be used. And the worst of all, they don't have an idea how secure we're going to store it. And I think that's key. We really have to ensure that the patient health information is protected at all times. In terms of manufacturers, well, that's going to be a problem, because they are not going to have too much motivation when we tell them that these, we have fancy ideas, but it's going to have high cost, it's going to incur. And add to it the potential lengthy delays that they may face for getting FDA approvals and regulatory clearances. And mind you, we also know that majority of these are in an infancy, so reimbursement is going to be a question there. So how do we tackle this? I think the most important thing is to find, identify, and invest in leaders who are going to champion the concept of precision imaging. You definitely want the support of the academic centers and the department chairs to encourage and foster an environment where research in precision imaging is going to take the highest precedence. We have to look beyond the RVUs and look at other metrics, and hopefully create an environment where we do feel we can identify those leaders who want to spend more time doing the precision imaging. It's really key to have a standardization at multiple levels. We want to make sure the vendors produce the equipments in a standard uniform way. We want to make sure that we acquire, the image acquisition protocol is uniform all across the centers. And we also want to make sure the radiologists have a uniform way of analyzing and interpreting the images. And finally, but pretty importantly, is we need to talk the same language. Structured reporting is definitely the way to go if we're going to have any success in precision imaging. Manufacturers, I guess, one way of helping them out is making them get in line with the NIH-led initiative. So hopefully, they would put the money onto more of this high risk, high reward, but those initiatives which are high up in the agenda, according to the NIH, which may potentially mean, fast tracking and getting, accelerated FDA approvals. So in summary, precision medicine is here to stay, but the successful implementation of that depends on active collaboration of all the stakeholders, and the future is very exciting for radiology.
Thank you for that great presentation. Thank you to all the task forces. We have about 15 minutes, so please give us some feedback. How do we make these task forces improve their work to to get it to the manuscript level? Any comments, King?
First of all, congratulate to everybody. I think this is a really high level product, and really proud of you. First, I'd like to comment on the last presentation. I think it's a great product, but there are two things that imaging can offer in precision medicine that I don't think you have mentioned, at least not in detail. One is that if you look at the literature, right, from Science, Nature, every single tumor nodule will have different genes. And there's no way you can biopsy every single nodule, right? So that's where imaging shines. Yeah, because we can actually look at every single nodule and say that nodule and that nodule are not the same, right? So that is one powerful reason why imaging is so important in precision medicine, because you cannot biopsy every single nodule. The second thing that is very important is that in radiogenomics, we have so many features that we actually don't look at most of the time. We use pattern recognition, right? We actually exclude a lot of the things that we think not to be relevant. Just like genes, you can't ignore those features, right? So the whole concept of radiogenomics is to categorize every single potential finding you have, not knowing whether they're important or not, and then, right, try to find relevance of combination of these findings.
Yeah, so I agree with you completely in there. I mean, the problem is when you first put in, it was almost 60-slide talk. But to sort of allude to you, the genomic heterogeneity is something it's big time. We've already have covered in the manuscript, and I think the key thing is to actually create the disease-based models. We now, like you said, we can create an imaging observation database. I can figure out everything on the CT images, everything on the PET, put everything onto a metric. You can create the imaging observation database. At the same time, also have to look at the clinical nomogram. You want to create a patient-based population study, including everything that let's say for lung cancer, taking angular states. You want to say the smoking history. You want to take what sort of the biopsy specimen, whether it's what sort of mutation was there, what immunohistochemical staining. Put everything together and what sort of treatment, and if the patient received a chemotherapy, you want to know what dose it was, what cycles. Ultimately, you want to correlate all this into creating a disease-based model where you are deciphering information from a 50-centimeter field of view axial CT image to a subcellular RNA, which is about in nanometers, and that's probably what they're trying to do. It's been done in on lung cancers, and our emphasis is we should be doing this in the majority of the tumors, and that's precisely how we're going to tackle the genomic heterogeneity.
I think the manuscript will be very well read, because this is a huge topic that we need to focus on. And going back to the second topic on the manuscript, has anyone thought about doing a match.com type of approach that actually have potential mentors put in their own characteristics and have potential mentees put in their characteristics and do a match, right? Because that will allow you to really find the right mentees to match with the right mentors. And they don't have to be the same institution. Through social networking and other potential interactions, they can actually get mentors that they fit the needs of the mentees. I've been thinking about that for a while, but I don't have the energy. Put into it, and it may be fun, right?
I think King's volunteering to be the matchmaker. Thank you for that, King. Any other feedback from the audience about other sessions, image sharing, virtual journal club? Don't be shy now. This is your last chance here to speak up.
I do have
Go ahead.
On the
Yeah.
virtual journal club. I think virtual journal is a great idea. discussions, right? Discussion of precision medicine, right? So it can grow into a much more robust discussion platforms, interaction platforms, and even mentorship platforms, right? If you build the tools, you don't have to be limited to just discussing journals, right? You can be discussing educational tools, right? Other stuff. So build the platform, but leverage it to do more things.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, King. And in musculoskeletal imaging, there are two such platforms. One is Intergalactic Conference that Mike Richardson runs every Friday that has about 50 centers participating and sharing cases, and all of our residents and fellows absolutely love it. And the other one is the One Case a Day platform, which Phil Tierman runs, which has probably 500 users from all over the world sharing MSK cases. And when I come in the morning, I have usually 10 cases there waiting for me from all different parts of the world, and it's really exciting to be part of that community, and it's exciting to see what excites other people. So I think it's really the future.
For mentoring and jobs, there's also for women, there's also a Radiology Chicks Facebook group. And so if anybody's interested in that, you can contact me.
Radiology Chicks. Nice.
We should set up a radiology Scots.
I started as a joke, but now there's almost 1,000 members.
So, but that all reach into the image sharing talk also, right? So if you actually have a cloud-based image sharing platform, then you can actually use it for virtual discussions, right? Virtual consoles, virtual mentors, right? So that the image sharing talk becomes one of the sort of enabling tools to allow some of this to really happen, right? So otherwise, how are you going to share images from 50 different countries? Right?
Any other feedback from anybody? By the way, as an advertisement, we're going to email a solicitation to all of you and probably some people not in this room about the task forces for next year. We'll have 7 task forces. So if you like the presentations this time around, if you want to contribute in any way, please check your email box and join. And it's a great opportunity to meet people from other institutions at various levels of training. This year we have about 60 people participating. About half of them are residents and fellows. And we have faculty from all stages of their careers, junior people like myself, senior people like King, and everybody in between. So anyways, thank you for coming. Thank you to all the speakers. It was hold on. Oh.
It's good to have white papers as a product, but I think the next step in the task force should be implementation. You have all these future directions. How are we going to actually realize it? Right? So I think for the RLA, we actually want to actually put some of the task forces instead of really implementation committees to try to implement some of these brilliant ideas that the task force has actually come up with. Liaise with the right groups, maybe SCA or ACR and so on, to actually start thinking about implementing some of these really tremendous recommendations that come out of the task forces. So the manuscript will be our sort of the product that we can show to the other groups and say, hey, we spent a lot of time thinking about this. These are the things that we need to be doing. Can you help us do it? And we form our own committee to help. I think that would be essentially the product that we
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, King. I mean, basically the idea, as the Radiology Research Alliance, we want to offer as much value to our affinity group members. And one of the things that's kind of coming, hopefully very soon, is to take some of these task forces that we've done, not just this past year, but in prior years, and try to operationalize them somehow into a long-standing working groups that potentially create a product such as the King's matchmaking service for mentors, or the Radiology Chick service, or whatever other kind of service you want to create I think we're open to new ideas. So if you have, if you have anything that you think would be of value to, the RRA membership or the AUR membership at large, where our RRA can help, please, let me or somebody else know, and we'll make it happen. I think we're out of time. So thank you for coming. Let's give another round of applause for all the speakers.